Okay, well, I really appreciate you agreeing to be interviewed. A couple of years ago, a friend of mine told me about your blog, The Polemicist, and the insight is really amazing. It's a lot of insight, which I think that the left needs more of.
Thank you.
So I think so. And okay, so couple of questions. Well, a couple of questions. You bring up a lot of interesting stuff about the impeachment. The
Yeah.
impeachment that we recently ended. It seemed to me and so many people kind of bizarre, like really bizarre. Like what the hell's going on here? Like okay, we had RussiaGate nonsense for like 3 years. The Mueller report was a dud. Mueller's testimony before Congress was a dud, predictably, and then they latched on to some relatively minor procedural thing about Trump's phone call to the president of Ukraine, and and it was predictable. It would end up in nothing. It would it wouldn't pass the Senate. It was predictable. I think so. People are like, what the hell's going on here? And Trump came out so much stronger. And so you had came out so much more stronger. Now he's really arrogant, cocky. So you had some really interesting observations on that. You thought it might have been connected to foreign policy, attempt to rein him in, most particularly Iran. You mentioned some kind of possibility of a quid pro quo with Graham and whatever was going on with that. I wonder if you could elaborate on that a bit.
Well, I didn't just make that up, although it wasn't
Sure,
much
sure.
in the
It's
press.
very
But there were. If you read my articles, there were reports about that in the press. I mean, it was mentioned in articles that I think we on the left especially, because we don't want to give Trump credit for anything, underestimated the extent to which what he did in not attacking Iran, starting last June, when the Iranians or when they blamed the Iranians for blowing up the ships in the Persian Gulf,
right.
And they wanted them to attack them, and then the Iranians shot down an American drone, and they wanted him to attack, and he said yes, attack, and he called off that attack with 10 minutes to go. I mean, that's the reporting on this.
That was
And
crazy.
all of the people around him were pissed off about it. I hope I can.
Yeah,
I
sure,
can speak
sure.
like that. Yeah. I can speak freely here, right? Everybody, all the neocons around him were pissed off about it. And then you had the attack on the Saudi oil facilities in September, and he didn't attack then. He didn't attack Iran. They wanted him to attack Iran. They blamed Iran for it. So you've had this, and that's when it was in September after that Pelosi turned around on impeachment and said, okay, now I'm going to impeach, even though for years she'd been saying, no, we can't impeach. It was silly to impeach, giving all the right arguments, but the so-called squad of progressives wanted to impeach, and they were wrong. I mean, but Pelosi, for good reasons, was resisting them. And when she turned around on it in September, I'm saying she didn't do that because she's become progressive, because she's listening to AOC and Ilhan Omar. She did it, and she didn't. She said why she did, because the CIA women who had been elected told her, put an op-ed in the Washington Post saying, oh, we're against Trump. We have to impeach Trump because, national security. Yeah. So you had this whole thing. And so you had this whole series of events with Iran, and calling off that strike with 10 minutes to go. I have never in my life seen anything that violated imperialist doctrine since, JFK called off the Bay of Pigs, wouldn't give air cover on the Bay of Pigs. And look what happened to him for that. So that was something that was really a sin against imperialist doctrine. And if you read the American Zionist press and the Israeli press, it was clear the Israelis were pissed off about this. And there was a big long article in the New York Times about how Netanyahu had been pushing for years, for a decade, for striking Iran, for the Americans to strike Iran. And here Trump passed up 2 or 3 chances. And not only passed up a chance, but actually started to strike it and called it off. So I'm saying this might be connected. For me, because as you and many people, what do they think they're getting out of this, the Democrats? Why would they do this? It's obviously something which is not going, despite what all the people who were self-deluded about this think, anybody who could think through this for a few steps would realize, unless they have some reason to think the Senate is actually going to vote to convict him, this is going to help Donald Trump. I mean, it's crazy. So what is it that Pelosi and Schumer might think would get the Senate to impeach him? And it would only be something behind the scenes, pressure from essentially the Israeli lobby and the neocons, because they don't trust him, because they're saying, look, this is a guy who's not doing what we need him to do, and he's not trustworthy from their point of view in foreign affairs. He does have a kind of quote unquote anti-war streak. He doesn't really want to go to war, but they push him into doing what they want to do anyway. That's what always happens, And what happened with Iran at the end of the day, and you'll see that there are. I think I have a comment, a featured comment at the end of my last article about it, where they said, after the fact, that Trump had been helped by the Soleimani strike. The Soleimani strike helped him. That convinced the Zionist lobby essentially, and Graham and the Zionists and the Senate, who had been really furious at him about not attacking Iran the previous year. That solidified his position in the Senate. So, and that it's been reported in the mainstream media that was a consideration of his in the Soleimani strike, because it was something that would help solidify his position in the Senate. So we'll never know, well, we might know it. Well, actually, we do know to some extent. He was in his mind. He thought about it. So, that was my only thing that I could imagine that would give Pelosi and Schumer and Jerry Nadler the idea that they might be able to turn votes in the Senate. Because if you're turning them on what's a crucial issue to everybody, is Israel and Iran, and we got to say that would be a reason they might have thought they could turn some votes. And it is the Israeli, and everybody should understand, and I wanted to make this clear too, I hope I did, that the situation between Israel and Iran is really at a very critical juncture. Because Iran, through the work of people like Soleimani, and through their technological advances in precision missiles, which is really what's important, how precision the missiles are. And I mean, look at that picture that I put of the strike in Saudi Arabia. There are holes, boom, precisely in the spots. This is what the Israelis are afraid of. And Soleimani has built up armed forces from Hezbollah and the popular militia units in Iraq, and Hezbollah has some of those precision missiles. So Israel is in a position where it's saying Iran has helped the resistance forces in the region build up enough strength that we cannot be totally nonchalant about doing anything we want to do, of attacking anybody we want to attack without getting hit seriously in return, and the Israelis don't want to accept that. And that's what the whole Iran thing is about. This whole business of the Iran deal is nothing to do with nuclear weapons. They want the Iranians to get rid of their missiles and to stop supporting the arming and training of get Iran, Hezbollah forces, and get out of Syria, stop protecting Syrians, helping Syrians, stop helping the Lebanese, stop helping the Yemenis. And that's what they're pushing for with renegotiating the Iran. It's not about the nuclear weapons. There's no nuclear weapons. Right. It's about this whole panoply of weaponry, which is non-nuclear, and actions and supportive actions like those of Soleimani throughout the region that have built up real resistance forces that the Israelis don't want to, can't stand to have around there. They want to get rid of them. So that's what the conflict is between Iran and the United States now. It's about those things, and that's what I thought might be working behind the scenes with the impeachment thing, and it might have been the reason why Pelosi and Schumer could have imagined they might have turned enough votes in the Senate. But Trump did what he had to do and was protected. And in the end of the day, you see what I'm saying essentially is, even if that's not true, this whole thing was kind of a kabuki. All the explicit charges against Trump were kind of a kabuki theater. These were not serious enough to impeach him and convict anybody. So something else in my mind had to be going on behind the scenes. And at the end of the day, they weren't serious enough. I mean, this is just, and they just don't get over it. They don't get over it. They're now going. Now we got to impeach Barr. We got to make Barr resign. I've been watching this for days and days. I'm at
Yeah.
my in-laws' house, and and my wife's father watching this days and days and days. It's about a bar, and we got to impeach Barr because he didn't want to send Roger Stone to jail for 7 years and only 3, or it wasn't him and it was them. And we're like, what are you talking about? Nobody cares about this.
The whole thing seemed weird. The Roger Stone thing seemed bizarre, but yeah. Yeah, it seems like Trump essentially, for whatever it's worth, has America first foreign policy. Although, if he in as much as he has, that would be his natural inclination.
Yeah.
But and originally he wanted to get tough with Iran, but didn't want a war. Step back from that. And Pompeo, the narrative seemed like Pompeo and Bolton were the warmongers, and he fired Bolton. But so he
Yeah,
didn't
yeah,
go.
but the Bolton policy is still there.
It's
And
still there.
Pompeo instantiates the Bolton policy, and Esper. I think they're Bolton. And Trump doesn't really have any depth of
No, no,
principle about this. And
no.
he did, even when uh, uh, he was talking about it. Trump has been anti-Iran, so Trump is particularly susceptible to being pushed into war with Iran. I was surprised that he pulled back on it
Yeah.
last June, because he is up to his eyes with Kushner and Netanyahu, and he's completely wrapped up in the Zionist narrative and the paradigm, and Iran is an enemy. So this is dangerous, and he can be pushed into that. And you see with Trump, he did want to withdraw from Syria, and then they got on him right away and said, "No, you really can't do that." So they gave him this, we got to stay in there for the oil in eastern Syria, which
Right.
is silly. It has nothing to do with the oil. But for his mind, oh yeah, that's a good reason. So we'll stay.
Yeah, that was weird too. Yeah.
But this is something that they get him to do. They get him. He increased the number of troops in Syria. He increases the number of troops in Afghanistan. He's done more drone bombing in Afghanistan in the last year, I think, than there was in a number of years under Obama. The last couple of years under Obama. So he in his own mind he says these things, but then he's a weak person.
Yeah.
He's a blowhard.
Yeah.
He knows he doesn't know things, so he cedes to these tough guy neocons and generals around him who want to, he's not going to defy them too much. Right. And they get what they want from him.
Right, that's interesting. You talked about the Trump effect. One of the good things about Trump, he's wrecking the empire in a way, or at least the PR is bad.
Yes.
He's like previous presidents wouldn't brag in a simplistic way about stealing the oil in Syria. He's openly doing it.
Yeah.
Taking the fig leaf off, which is a positive development, as well as seems to be wrecking NATO, or at least creating a lot of dissension, which is probably a good thing.
Although absolutely. I think I quoted Michael Hudson at one point saying Trump is doing more to undermine the Americans' imperial power than all the left is, because he is making it hard for people for other countries to go along with him. He's a buffoon. He's kind of gross and crass, and he says things you're not supposed to say, and he's too overt, and he's too impetuous, and he changes his mind from one day to the next. And he's on tweeting all the time and saying nasty things about people. So the French and the British and the Germans, they don't like this. So he is undermining the soft power of the empire,
Right.
which is an important thing for the United States. The United States has to present itself as doing things for humanitarian reasons and for moral reasons, and getting up with someone like Obama, who's a soft-spoken,
urbane, more sophisticated.
Exactly, and tells the narrative and tells the story in a way that everybody is attractive person.
He's a great con artist. Yeah.
Yeah, but Donald Trump is a bad con artist, because he's just out to get you. He's just coming up and say. So this is has been, I think, the Trump effect, and that's why they really hate him. That's the real reason they want to get him out, because he threatens the stability of the empire. You gotta be a smooth talker. You can't be a blatant blowhard. The smooth talking con man versus the blowhard con man. You want the smooth talker, and it's really the situation that what he's done now. And what he does is also the Trump effect. He takes the policy that was de facto everybody else's policy and institutes it in a blatant and de jure, and takes it that one step further to its logical conclusion. I mean, this is what he's done with Israel, recognizing Jerusalem, which, I have an article on my site about the Barack Obama, the convention in 2012, the Democratic convention, where they had an amendment to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and there was a voice vote, and you could see it was voted down, and the person on the day
I remember that.
saying, and they said, "Oh, no, pass it," and she just said it's passed. And MSNBC, I remember the MSNBC had a panel on it, and they were all there, and Lawrence O'Donnell was going, "Ha, ha, ha, that's just the way it is. You always pass things without, like against the will of the convention."
Right.
So this is a policy that's been a bipartisan policy, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and Trump goes and does it. And de facto, they were letting Israel do whatever they wanted to do in Israel, in Jerusalem, but you just didn't acknowledge it. And allowing Israel, recognizing the Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. I mean, that's just black letter international law. It's against international. So you don't say they can have it. You just let them have it. Nobody was doing anything to prevent them from building in the Golan Heights or seeking oil in the Golan Heights. So, these are things. And now, this latest peace deal is, deal of the century of business. This is, it is essentially what every previous administration has been allowing Israel to do. They just never came out and said, this is now going to be our official policy. So all these people who are complaining about it are people who were either tacitly allowing or really pushing for it. The Democrats were on record. We want Jerusalem to be the capital. We want Israel to have sovereignty over Jerusalem, capital of Israel. So, he's doing all these things that are embarrassing. He's an embarrassment to the empire and to the imperial narrative. He's an embarrassment, not because he's doing anything which is terribly different, but because he's doing it in ways which are more blatant and harder to stomach.
Right. Interesting. What is the role of Israel exactly in U.S. imperialism? Is it the tail that wags the dog, or probably several layers to this? It's a U.S. aircraft carrier.
This is a complex question. I think the American and the Western in general attachment to Israel and to Zionism is something I have in one of my articles. I talk about this. It's a surplus oppression. It's not something that's necessary for capitalism or for American imperialism in the sense of America dominating the world. America could dominate the Middle East very well by having good relationships with the Arab countries, and does have good relationship with the Arab monarchies. In 1947, 48, when this was part of the question of what to do about Palestine, was part of the American. Read Alison Weir's book on this. The State Department was saying, this is going to hurt us. This is going to hurt us in the long run. This is going to get us in trouble. We're going to get dragged into things we don't need to get dragged into. I think, and this is part of the huge problem for this. It is something which people think of as a virtue. Liberal Americans, over 70 years, have thought we have to do this because it's compensatory colonialism, because of what we, the Western world, did to the Jews in World War II. We have to let them do whatever they want to, and in the 40s, 48, early period, 47, 48, 49, nobody gave two thoughts about what happened to the Palestinian Arabs. They were a dispensable population. It was still a colonial mentality. This is really the last colonialism that you could get away with ideologically. And you got away with it on the grounds of, well, this is compensatory, we have to, but it's like this horrible thing where advanced Western countries that visited, a horrible genocide attempt against European Jewry, then turned around in order to assuage their own consciences, allowed Palestinian Arab population to become the ones who would be the whipping boys for this, essentially, and whipping people for this. And they could be thrown off of their land and have their land stolen and be killed. I mean, this was murder and expulsion and extermination. And The problem is that, and for many years and decades, and then they built up a narrative about it. That's been a narrative in the West, from the Exodus movies to, of how wonderful Israel is and how much it represents something, and blah 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 blah. And you just erase the Palestinians from that and what happened to them. And now, this is because of the internet, really, more than anything else, being eroded and being undermined, and people see what history is and what it is. They say this is colonialism, and this is colonialism.
Right.
But the older generations live this as a virtue. This is something we have to do. That's why this, when you see things like Joe Biden as vice president saying I'm a Zionist, and you see, I mean, the example of this was Bill Clinton standing in front of a group of I don't know where it was Jewish donors or whatever, and saying, this is a guy, now Bill Clinton, who was excoriated by the right wing for avoiding the draft in Vietnam, standing up, president of the United States, or ex-president of the United States at the time, saying, I would take a gun and fight and die for Israel. And nobody even thinks about it. Nobody in the right wing said, how dare he do that? How dare someone say they would fight for another country rather than ours? This is, and you have an Israeli intelligence officer named Chief of Staff of the President of the United States, Rahm Emanuel. Nobody even says a word about it. Imagine if there was a Saudi intelligence officer named Chief of Staff. What are you talking about?
I didn't know he was. I knew he was in the IDF, but I didn't know he was an intelligence officer.
I think he was in an intelligence unit.
That's interesting. Well,
but so you have. He plays it down, but I think he was in an intelligence unit.
Okay, makes sense.
I'm saying that. I'm pretty sure of that because I'm pretty sure I looked it up when I was writing my articles. But to anybody who's watching, I'll say I'm saying that with some high degree of confidence, but not certainty. But anyway, you have this situation where there's a real commitment here, which is beyond the needs of imperialism. So I'm not, I'm not of the Noam Chomsky camp where Israel is simply a pawn of American imperialism. I think to a large extent, it's the American commitment to Zionism is something which is excessive from the point of view of the capitalist imperialism, and is something which imposes burdens on American capitalist imperialism that it's been relatively easy to pay those burdens, but they're not really necessary. And it's a bizarre situation. So it's one of those things like racism to a certain extent, which historically has been part of capitalism, but in principle isn't necessary. We're happy to equally exploit everybody, but this has been something. The Zionist narrative and the Zionist paradigm are something that have been incorporated totally into the American. It was become part of the American narrative in a certain way that's very hard to disengage.
Right. I see what you mean. That's interesting. Yeah. You talked about Syria, and I agree with your take about the Syrian civil war, that no sides are really good, but I would see U.S. imperialism as the worst force. And to some extent, U.S. imperialism has been defeated by Russia or other countries and the Syrian Arab Army. It's a complicated situation there, but there's a division on the left. You're probably familiar with Louis Prioct, people who see Assad as the main bad guy. And I'm not really a fan of Assad, but what if you could elaborate on that? It's a hot topic in the radical left.
Of course, yeah. And I got in the middle of it, and I said I was quite clear about that, and I knew what I was saying. I support the fight of the Syrian government and the Russian and their allies, Russia and Iran, against what is, I consider, a proxy war on behalf of the United States and Israel. Again, this is part of the push of the Israelis to weaken and destroy any potentially resistant states around them. And the Yinon plan, which was, we want to reduce these states, we want to divide them up, we want to have extremist, jihadi type chaos in these states because it makes us look better and puts us in a position. And They have systematically, and people who, if you don't think the Iraq War was about that, this idea that all these wars are just senseless and crazy and there's no sense. There is a sense. That was the sense. The Iraq state was divided. It was destroyed. It was taken off the map as far as Israel was concerned, as a as a site of resistance to Zionism in Israel, and as a site of support, material and financial and military support for Palestinian resistance. And Libya was too. And the next step was Syria, and the next step is Iraq. And they got stopped in Syria. They ran into a roadblock. They ran into a roadblock in 2015, I think, when the Russians came in. And everybody has to. I have this article about that. The Russians came into Syria after the Obama administration announced that they would attack Syrian forces. So, up until that time, they were playing a game that they weren't really after Syrian forces. Then they were just trying to fight whatever they were trying to do. It's all lies. But the United States announced, and it was a change of policy, that they would attack Syrian forces who came against any of the quote unquote rebel groups that they supported. So that was going to be, the United States was announcing its intention to attack Syrian armed forces directly, and that's when the Russians came in and said, "Oh, we are here to, fight the terrorists and ISIS," and produced within a couple of weeks photographs of convoys of trucks that ISIS has been selling oil from, for months, and the Americans obviously knew about it and obviously were doing nothing about it. And blah blah blah. So that's when the Russians came in. Now I went through so my position on this is the Syrian government is authoritarian, Ba'ath socialist government of a certain type, of the type that was in Iraq. But, that's not why the United States is. That's not why this war is going on. This is not a war for democracy. It's not a war against authoritarianism. Yeah. And the forces that are fighting in there are not... whatever happened in the first days of the Civil War in 2011 in places like Homs, and that's debatable too. And I didn't start out this way. I started out thinking, well, that was a real uprising, blah, blah, blah. And there were elements of real uprising. There's no question about it. In every one of these countries, they're authoritarian. There are going to be people who are uprising for real reasons, for good reasons. But from the outset, the United States had pushed arms into that. They had pushed jihadi groups into that. And any quote-unquote democratic demands were hijacked, I think, from the outset. And certainly within a year, they were totally... any kind of indigenous democratic revolution was totally overwhelmed by the influx of thousands of foreign fighters, and what the New York Times called not a cavalcade, a flood. That's another word for flood of weapons in through the United States and through the Gulf countries. So, and this was out to the purpose of this is not to have a democratic Syria. It's to have a Syria that is broken up into pieces, in which jihadis have rule over a lot of the territory, and it's split up into other pieces. They didn't care about anything but breaking up the Syrian state. And this has been a real interruption in the imperialist narrative, and it's not over. It was really important that they stopped Trump from withdrawing all the troops from Syria, and there are American troops in Syria, and they're trying to push a little out of their enclave in eastern Syria, and they might be trying to get the Turks to have a real fight with the Syrians, because if the Turkish army and the Syrian army fight, then that's a NATO force, and then the United States can attack on the basis of there's attacks with the. So there's still a very dangerous situation, but it did put a roadblock of sorts. It may not be a permanent roadblock, and this is one of the things that's happened. It's created a situation where either the United States and the forces trying to destroy Syria punch through that roadblock in a more decisive way, because Syria also was a prelude to Iran. That was the idea. We get rid of, but now they've made Iran stronger. So this is how are they going to deal with that? It can only be dealt with by a more decisive application of military force, and that's very dangerous. But I don't put it past them, and nobody should put it past them. The Syrian war isn't over. The United States, if Turkey and Turkish and Syrian armies clash directly in Syria, I think the United States will attack Damascus. Again, they won't put troops in, but they'll directly attack the capital with air power, and they'll be calling the question to the Russians whether the Russians will allow them to do that, and it's just very dangerous.
Right. That's interesting. As far as Russia goes, Putin, like Russia's not socialist anymore. They're not a progressive country, but I would see them as somewhat progressive insofar as they push back against U.S. imperialism for their own reasons.
Yeah.
But they're afraid of
yes.
for their own reasons, but yeah.
When I said about Syria, I'll go back to that question for a second. The analogy I use, because everybody was saying, "Oh, Syria," the people supported Project, and those people were like, "Oh, it's like the Spanish Civil War. These people going to fight in Syria."
Yeah.
What a bunch of nonsense. And and if you want Assad to win, that means you're an Assadist, or you support
Assad apology,
dictatorship. Blah 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 blah. No, this is. The analogy I thought of, which I think was a pretty good analogy, was it's not a matter of picking who's really a great guy versus, but is this an imperialist war, and do you defend even a dictator against imperialism?
Right.
And the analogy that I thought of was Haile Selassie in Ethiopia, Abyssinia, when the Italians wanted to attack and conquer Ethiopia with Haile Selassie was a vicious tyrant. Mm-hmm. He was a vicious tyrant. Yeah. That doesn't mean you don't support him when this is a colonial war of the European power to come in and try and take over a country in Africa. You don't say, "Oh well, he's a nasty person, so we're going to support the Mussolini and the fascists." And people have to realize that what the Americans and the forces they brought in, not the right-wing, horrible jihadi forces they brought in there were, this was an attempt at a colonial attempt, not to take it over in the sense, but to destroy the country, to take it over in the sense that they would remove it as a country from the field of consideration. So I would say, not Russia, again, this is not a country, again, it is. First of all, Russia's a capitalist country that was made by the United States. I mean, Russian oligarchs were the product of American policy. Russia is a conservative, socially conservative in some sense. I forget who it was said a few years back. Vladimir Putin is the most kind of intelligent and reasonable conservative on the world stage now. Russia is a conservative in the foreign policy sense, realistic. Country is looking after its own interests. Its interests now are to have good relations with everybody and to have good trade with everybody and to build pipelines and blah, blah, blah. And that's just because it's an emerging capitalist power in some respect. You know what I mean? Right. So I have no doubt that, I don't love Vladimir Putin. I mean, it doesn't mean anything to me. He represents, at the moment, Russia is a capitalist kind of oligarchic or plutocratic capitalist system that we created, but they also aren't interested in aggressive war anywhere. It has no value to them, and they are resisting things that are worth resisting. They're resisting because they know it's going to end up coming back at them. Under Putin, they've been more independent, and they haven't been as they were under
Yeltsin. Was horrible.
Yeltsin, they were just real, absolute puppets of the United States. Now Putin has re-energized kind of sense of national independence, and we're not going to be pushed around, and we are going to pursue our own interests, and we're going to make our own alliances, and we don't want what essentially the United States did when the Soviet Union dissipated, was to replace what was the UN international system of international law and that whole architecture of international relations with a system where the international community as defined by the United States, that is the U.S. and its allies, were now defining what we could do, what we could not do. We can attack anybody we want as long as we get our allies to go along with it. And, we're now the arbiters of everything that's good and right in the world, and we're doing that explicitly. That started with Clinton in Yugoslavia, and the Russians went along with it until Libya taught them a lesson. And they stopped in Syria, and they turned around, and that's why the Americans are pissed off at Vladimir Putin, because he just won't go along with that anymore. And he's saying the Americans are trying to turn everybody into their vassals, and they had turned Russia into a vassal state for a number of years, and it is no longer. And now you have China rising, and China's not going to be anybody's vassal.
Right.
Yeah. Russians and Chinese come together, and again, this has nothing to do. We can have, I'm a Marxist. Russia was a devolution from socialism to capitalism, from whatever form of socialism it was. It was a post-capitalist society. Now it's a capitalist society. China has all kinds of issues about that. We can have that discussion about what we think of those states as socialist or communist states or capitalist states, but they're independent states, and they have the right to make their own path of development. And this is what the United States doesn't want. It doesn't want states to have their own path of development. It wants them to have the path of development that's open to American capital, and that subserviates, makes itself subservient to American capital, and to the preservation of capitalist elites around the world. What's positive about Russia and or China, insofar as it is the case, is that Russia doesn't care whether Venezuela has a social democratic, quote unquote, socialist society. They're not a socialist society. Mostly private capital owns the wealth of the country, but it's a moderate social democracy. The United States will come in and attack it. Yeah. Russia doesn't even care whether Cuba's socialist society, as long as they can work with them and have peaceful relations. It's so. But this is not the United States. The United States wants to prevent anybody from going down a path of development and of economic development that can be perceived as socialist, which is kind of crazy. But that's what they want, and they will do that. And they also, the extra surplus thing in the Middle East, which is extremely dangerous. It wants everybody in the region to accept Israel as being able to do whatever it wants. Impunity of Israel, the ability to extend itself wherever it wants, to attack whomever it wants, and if you're not willing to do that, then they're going to come after you too. So that's all something that has to be worked out. But so the Russians and the Chinese, the Russians especially, the Russians have been more proactive in this certainly, but Chinese know what's going on too. And I applaud the Russians for doing what they do in Syria. That's all I can say. And I don't think it's imperialism. I think it's counter-imperialism. I don't have illusions about what Russia may or may not do in the future. I know, for example, I would say to people think I'm a Putin apologist. I am sure the Americans like to think this guy Navalny is the opposition in Russia. The main opposition in Russia is the Communist Party. By far, by a factor of 10 more than Navalny. Navalny's a right-wing.
Navalny was, yeah.
Yeah, and so and I am sure that if there were a possibility of another kind of socialist political offensive inside Russia to renationalize industries and to dispossess the nouveau capitalist class in Russia, that Putin would oppose it, and he would act on behalf of the capitalists. That's what I think anyway at this point. But so I don't have any illusions about that. But it's this is the world we live in now, where you're fighting kind of rearguard actions to prevent imperialism from destroying the Middle East and destroying swaths of the world, Latin America, and who you got on your side. I mean, it happens to be Russia.
Yeah, that's true. Interesting. Pivoting somewhat, your take on the U.S. elections. It's the Democratic primary. It's a total mess, of course. Looks like Buttigieg is probably strong evidence he's a plant, a CIA plant. Guy's a spook. Lots of evidence about that.
Yeah.
So do you think they'll let Bernie win the nomination, or do you think they'll take it away from him, or sabotage it like they did last time?
And no, I don't think they'll. My position when I wrote my last article was like 10% chance. Now it's maybe 15% because he's doing very well. 15, 20%.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: if he does not get a majority of delegates, so that he can win on the first round of voting, and even then they could change the rules. That would be so outrageous, but they might. But let's presume they don't. That they keep the rules, and if he doesn't get a majority of delegates on the first round of voting, I think they will do everything they can to give it to someone else on the second round.
Right.
Their problem is that they've created rules which were meant to prevent him from rising, which are the 15% rules for delegates. You can't get any delegates unless you get 15% of the vote in a primary. So, and that was so that they were hoping there would be an early leader who would get the lead quickly and then you'd never be able to catch him. And they didn't think that would be Bernie.
Yeah.
Biden.
So
they've now created a situation where if Bernie has the momentum that it seems like he has, then he's going to be the one who's getting delegates. And because especially if they're all split up, Biden is obviously collapsing. Okay, Buttigieg and Klobuchar. I mean, these people will get some votes somewhere, but they're not going to have any kind of mass appeal across the country. They have 0% support among the non-white communities. This is crazy. Steyer, who is he? I mean, he can put some ad money out and get some votes, but you got to get 15% of the votes. So you have a situation where you're going to have probably maximum of 3 people in any race that get 15% of the vote. So, and if Bernie ends up amassing a large plurality of delegates, which he can do now, I think, and nobody else can beat that or get even near it, no single person, then it's going to be very difficult for him if he comes into the nomination with 40% of the delegates. And the closest other person has 25 or 30 even, then it's going to look very bad to take it away. So I think what they want to do, but first of all, they want to prevent him from getting 51% of the delegates. So they got to have someone they got to winnow the field down so that there's a second place finisher who's going to come above 15% and get, as the race goes on, it's going to be that person in second place who's going to be also amassing a large percentage of delegates. And I think they're starting to put at least right as of today, they want to put their bets on Bloomberg doing that because he can pay for it. It's amazing what you're watching happen. He's getting himself in first and second place, or in second place nationally, and in, second and third place in all of these, after 2 weeks of spending $300 million on $400 million on ads. So I think they're going to put a lot of pressure on, if Buttigieg or Warren or Klobuchar don't start getting delegates the next couple of races, if they finish third and fourth without delegates, none of them can get double digits of delegates. They're going to put pressure on them to get the hell out and let that second place vote go to Bloomberg so that he will get a large portion of delegates.
Right.
And even if he can't get the majority, it doesn't make a difference. As long as he prevents Bernie from getting the majority of delegates. Then here's what I'm going to tell you right now. I think we're about to write something up about this. I think if that happens and they go into the convention and Bernie Sanders has a plurality and the second place person is the second number of delegates is Bloomberg, then when they go into the second round of voting, Bloomberg will give his delegates to somebody else. Bloomberg does not want to be the nominee. Well, he may want, but the Democrats don't want to run Bloomberg for president.
Yeah.
And because if they do that, if they steal it from Bernie for Bloomberg, they know they're finished as a party.
Right.
So what Bloomberg will do, this is my speculation at the moment, what the DNC and Bloomberg will do at that moment is get together and say, we'll give it to a progressive, Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah.
See, we didn't give it to the billionaire.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't give it. And guess what, Bernie? You didn't get 50% of the vote. Look, we added up all the other votes, and they weren't for you, so therefore we're going to give them to somebody else.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be this billionaire.
Right.
It's going to be, and Bloomberg's delegates will vote for Elizabeth Warren. I almost guarantee it'll be Elizabeth Warren, because she's now setting herself up for that by criticizing Bloomberg. So that when it happens, she'll say, "You see, we picked the other anti-billionaire leftist."
Right.
And that will keep Bernie in the fold, because even Bernie might bolt if they gave it to Bloomberg.
Yeah. Right.
My fear is that he wouldn't even then. So, as I said, I've been talking to this guy, John Beecham, who's very good, has an organization called Mass Action, which is revolutionary socialists supporting Bernie Sanders. I support the campaign. He's fighting for good social democratic things. He's terrible on some foreign policy issues. But I think Bernie Sanders is a progressive campaign, and the people in it are absolutely good people, progressive. They're the right things. They should be supported. And we should be aware of the fact that Bernie Sanders is A, unlikely to get the nomination, and B, very likely, if he doesn't get the nomination, to support whomever the Democrats nominate.
Yeah.
At that point, we have to be against the Democratic Party and against Bernie Sanders. I mean, I was never in the Democrat, or haven't been for decades. I have re-registered as a Democrat in order to vote for Bernie in the New York State primary. And if he wins the nomination, I will vote for him as for president. But I'm not going to vote for any of these other clowns, and none of them. And and anybody I think Bernie has, what he's done is, as I've said, he's great positive things. He's built this mass movement, which is at least proto-socialist, willing to be anti-capitalist, fighting for real social democratic demands, not phony little means-tested things. And is now dedicated to doing that and won't stand for much less. And on the other hand, his greatest weakness is that he probably isn't willing enough to fight the Democratic Party, either to get the nomination or to break from them if necessary when they go forward with another 4 years of baloney, which isn't good. None of these people are going to beat Donald Trump anyway, except him, I don't think. That's the situation we're in, and I don't have any illusions about Bernie Sanders, but he's doing the right. He's doing a good movement. He's provoked and is leading and has inspired a really good movement that we should support. I mean, these are people. Everybody out there is supporting good. Medicare for all, single payer, universal coverage is a powerful, good thing. It's the elimination of a for-profit industry that's tens of billions of dollars of value. That's a very radical thing in the United States, and why they're fighting it. And the other thing I think is interesting, I'm thinking about now, is that Bloomberg has just, in 2 weeks, given us a lesson in Marxism. I mean, this is the ruling class. They can come in and exert immense political pressure, practically control the political process. They don't care what party they're in. Donald Trump's a Republican. He's a Democrat. One day he's a Republican. The next day, Bloomberg's a Republican. One day, no Democrat. Because the parties don't mean anything to them. That's about class power. The Democratic Party itself is demonstrating it's really about class power. It doesn't. Bloomberg is not running against Trump. He's running against Bernie and the left. So he'll get out of it in order to prevent the left from leaving the party. You know what I mean? This is the point. He's running. I saw somebody the other day said, why isn't... So a tweet the other day, tweets that were interesting. If Bloomberg had run as a Republican in 2016 and won, and Donald Trump now declared himself a Democrat, would it be okay to support Donald Trump against Bloomberg? Because they're no different. Really, it really is the same thing. If Donald Trump is just the same policies, the Democratic Party has absolutely demonstrated now it's not Donald Trump's racism. It's not his sexism. Bloomberg is worse.
Bloomberg is the same way, yeah.
Worse. Donald Trump bloviates and says a bunch of shit. But Bloomberg ran a Jim Crow policy of policing in New York City for years and bragged about it until a couple of months ago. He was never against it. Bloomberg was against the minimum wage. Bloomberg Donald Trump put out an ad in the newspaper when the Central Park Five were being tried, saying if they're guilty, they should be executed. Bloomberg, after they were exonerated, withheld the payments to them. So this guy is as a worse racist, his sexism, again, in practice, effectively, within his organization, was nasty as hell. Everything about him, he gives the most stupid right-wing talking points. There was the financial crisis happened because they stopped redlining. I mean, this is just nonsense. We can't have minimum wages. We got to cut Medicare and Social Security. All of this goes.
Oh yeah, we just people over 95. They just let them. They have cancer. There's nothing we can do. Yeah.
So this is, he's no better than Donald Trump, and he's worse. I think he's worse, and substantively, but he talks better. He gives a better. He's got a better line. He comes across as smart and articulate, where Donald Trump comes across as a blowhard. So that's this is what you're getting. So, and I saw somebody else saying the other day, why isn't he spending his money to primary Trump if he's against Trump? And that's a very good question, because when you think about it, you realize, A, it's because he couldn't beat Trump, and he knows it, no matter how much money he spends, because the Republican Party primaries are not necessarily, they are, there's no superdelegates in the Republican Party. So they're more Democratic in that sense than Democratic.
Ironically, yeah.
And two, he's not going to. So much money is not going to translate into necessarily enough votes. So, but the point is, so he's not running against Trump, and he knows he's not going to beat Trump in the election for the same reasons. He can for the same reasons that people stayed home, or either voted for Trump or stayed home. The black vote in Milwaukee, in Wisconsin, didn't come out and vote for Hillary Clinton. They're not going to come out and vote for Mike Bloomberg. All Trump has to do is depress the black turnout by 2 or 3%, and he'll be elected. And nobody's going to come out to vote for Mike. I mean, Trump is going to run to the left of Bloomberg.
Yeah.
And he's going to have all his racist stuff, all these things about I'm against the minimum wage and I want to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Trump wants to do it too, but he'll back off on it and wait until after the election, and he'll have Bloomberg's videos on loop. So he's not going to win against Trump, and he knows it. He knows he can't win the Democratic primary, and he knows he can't win the election, but he can stop Bernie. He can get enough delegates to stop Bernie Sanders. That's what he's doing now.
That's interesting. Interesting take. Yeah, and I think Trump will beat Elizabeth Warren if she's a nominee.
I mean, you see her. She did it. She proved it. She gets up and she triangulates. And what do I think they want me to say? You see her doing it.
Yeah.
Where Trump gets up and says whatever the hell he wants, and you may not like it, you may hate it. But he might not even understand what he's saying. But he's just talking off the cuff. Whereas she's trying to figure out what and you saw what happened to her because she backtracked from Medicare for All.
Right.
I'm for Medicare for All. I'm for Medicare for All. She was doing well, and then the consultants came in, and all the Hillary Clinton people came into her campaign and said, "No, this is not what people want to hear. It's too much." Blah blah. And she backed off, and immediately she slid. And they won't say it on mainstream media. That's why they'll say it was because she couldn't say how to pay for it. But that wasn't the reason why. The reason why is because she backed away from it, and everybody saw what she was starting to do. Oh, I said I was for this, but now I don't think maybe I'm not because I know because people are telling me I shouldn't say this. So, this is what people see this now. And there's only one authentic person. Again, there's a person in the race. Well, there's not one authentic person. Bloomberg's authentic. He's saying what he feels like. It's crap. And Tom Steyer is authentic. And Andy Yang was authentic. And Tulsi Gabbard is authentic. Yeah. And she is disgracefully. But I mean, among all these moderates, and Klobuchar is authentic too. She just has nothing much to say. But Buttigieg and Sanders, you see them figuring out what they should be saying and trying to say something without saying anything. And people hate that, and that would just be Trump swatted away.
Right. He's really good at attacking his enemies pointing out, picking out. Yeah, it was interesting to watch Hillary Clinton call Tulsi Gabbard a Russian agent. It was like, that was insane. Not surprising, but yeah. Pivoting slightly. A friend of mine said you're involved in the Assange solidarity movement in New York. Wonder if you
Yes.
could talk about that briefly.
Well, I think there have been some good uh, turns in that case. I just saw today that Amnesty International came out saying Assange should not be sent to the United States under any circumstance.
Finally, yeah.
And that's really good. About time. Yes, I've written 2 articles on Assange, on the Assange case. It's, you know, it's a huge, stinking thing in the middle of the world. And anybody who's interested in free speech or freedom of the press, from any point of view, but especially from a progressive point of view, should be outraged about this. So, I've been part of a small group in New York for months. We've been going once a week we were for many weeks at the New York Times building on Thursday, and then we've gone to Grand Central Station, and it's grown somewhat, as the case has coming to a denouement, because you're going to have this final hearing, I think on February 24th, an extradition, well, maybe not final, but an extradition hearing. And, this is something that everybody should be outraged about. And this demonstrates what hypocrites the American press are, and the so-called progressive media. I mean, there's nobody. The New York Times should have this on, Hong Kong. If someone in Hong Kong gets arrested, if someone in, Russia gets arrested, it's all over the news for weeks at a time. But this is a guy who's being, who's facing the rest of his life in jail for doing exactly the same thing that the New York Times was a publisher with him, published the things that he did, for doing the same thing that any publisher would do, that the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Boston Globe did, and that any correspondent with those papers would have done and has done. And Americans should be outraged. You see the power of the media to just make things disappear. Things that should be in the forefront of everybody's mind disappear. And it's been kind of sad to a certain extent to see you when you're out talking about Assange in front of the New York Times building, or how few people even know who he is. Oh, I think I heard about him, but and of course, all the things that come to their mind, first of all, are always the rapist.
Yeah, that's
and all the lines, all the narratives that the media has put out about him negatively are what come to mind. And he must be. John Pilger has been great on this and wrote a great article yesterday about this. And Assange must be defended. And it's going to be a huge hit on freedom of the press if Assange is extradited to the United States, where he will not get a fair trial and he will spend the rest of his life in jail. And it's already a hit. As I said in one of my articles, watching Assange being dragged out of the embassy by the British police, already every new journalist in the world has to start thinking, wait a minute, should I really do this? Should I really take this chance? And if he's sent into prison for the rest of his life, they're going to be doing this. They may not say it. They may not even express it to themselves explicitly, but you cannot help but think, should I take this chance in exposing this secret or in writing this thing? So it's of crucial importance that we support Assange, and the time is coming in the next couple of weeks where the British, have to put up or shut up as to what they're going to do. He was spied on by the CIA in ways that alone, that his lawyers were spied on, and all of his correspondence and his whole life was spied on by the CIA. The British should throw the case out for that reason. This is not an American. He is he's a citizen of Australia. He did no work in the United States. He's committed no crimes in England. This is the British being poodles again of the United States, trying to apply their law extraterritorially in Britain over the citizen of a third country who has no responsibility to the United States and shouldn't be being charged under American law for anything. It's horrible. And again, there's all kinds of things that are bad about it. It's freedom of the press. It's the Americans forcing the extraterritorial application of their laws, forcing a third country to make that to do that on their behalf. Everything about it is bad, and this should be in the forefront of people's minds.
All right, that's interesting. Okay, great. Well, I appreciate it. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Well, for the purposes of the American left, yeah, I think it's kind of important to say one more thing, which I've written about, and what we see this happening with Bernie Sanders and the Medicare for All and the debate, it is important, and there's a lot of resistance to this, but I've become enamored. I've become persuaded by what's called modern monetary theory,
Okay.
and
You wrote an article on that,
yeah, I wrote 2 articles on it, and you see what happens when this pay for it. How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to? Which taxes are you going to raise to pay for it? And everybody answers that question in their own way. And we can't have this discussion now, but I think it's important for leftists in the United States to start to realize that taxes do not fund government programs.
Yeah, correct.
and taxes are necessary. And you see this with Bloomberg.
Mm-hmm.
Say someone like Bloomberg. This is why taxes are necessary. Because if you're too wealthy, you're too powerful. And the reason for taxes is to take the money away from. So people are too rich, not because we need that money to pay for something else, but because we can't let someone be that powerful. It's that much more powerful than anybody else. But we don't need that money to pay for Medicare for All or anything. The taxes, you got to understand how money works and I think that, if we understood that, what we would be saying with Medicare for All would be Medicare for All, and not only we not raise payroll taxes, we eliminate the payroll taxes that are now being paid, which are not necessary, and give everybody the biggest raise they've ever had. Most working people, if you eliminated the FICA taxes, would get the biggest raise they've ever had, and that's not paying for this. So this is an issue that I think we can get into, but I've gotten into it, and I recommend maybe people read some of my articles or go into Stephanie Kelton, read Stephanie Kelton. But it's something that you see right now there's a trap, there's a pay-for trap that everybody gets into. We can't have deficits. We're going to reduce the deficit. If we doubled our taxes, we couldn't pay for Medicare for All. These are things that are phony questions, and I just urge everybody on the left to take a serious look at modern monetary theory.
Okay, thank you for sharing. One more thing, if I may.
Yeah.
You mentioned, I think, not in the Polemicist, but I think on Facebook.
Yeah.
You're critical of vaccinations and big pharma.
Yes.
Pharma.
Okay. Good. Thank you for asking. I don't want to back off on this.
Okay.
And I do think the left this is really, really bad. And what you have to understand, there are laws being passed now in every state throwing children out of school for not getting vaccinated. There's 50,000 in New York, 50,000 in California. These are single mothers. These are parents. And so this is mandatory vaccination. And I can show you, I urge you, there's a woman called Christine Stable-Ben. She has a thing on YouTube that's just great. And she starts out by saying, the second most important thing you can do for your child after loving them is vaccinate them. She works as a scientist in vaccinating children in the third world. But she has and she demonstrates, but this vaccination has these effects. This vaccination there are vaccinations that actually have bad, non-specific effects on people. And we've demonstrated this in the third world. Yeah, they might prevent the kid from getting diphtheria, but they make the kid more susceptible to other diseases. So all I'm saying, what people have to have an attitude towards vaccination that they have towards any other drug, okay? And this is an incredible, I don't think a lot of people understand that since 1986, pharmaceutical companies are immune from exempt from liability for the harm that vaccinations might cause. People have an anti-scientific attitude about it. They have a condescending, insulting attitude toward people who question it, okay? There are tens of thousands of people. You don't see this on CNN or NBC. There were tens of thousands of people coming to the state houses in Trenton and in Sacramento to prevent bills that would get their children thrown out of school. And these were people, a lot of them, who had vaccinated their children, and one of their children was harmed, and they can't get a medical exemption. They're trying to prevent doctors from giving medical exemptions for vaccinations. This is from a leftist point of view. I don't understand this. This is the worst kind of authoritarian government. This is informed consent for medical procedures. This is forcing children to get 8 at a time, 8 vaccinations at a time, 65 vaccinations in the first years of their life. Things that have no scientific value whatsoever. I mean, you've got to have an attitude about science, which is, this is not settled like that. I mean, these are open. There are hundreds of scientific questions about the efficacy and the safety of vaccinations. You have now fully vaccinated populations getting measles and mumps. Yeah. And so, there's a logic to this, which is, really obvious if you think about it for a little bit. And the history of vaccination is something that people really haven't. It's just as phony as the history of American democracy in the world. And if you look into it, but this is an ideology, and it's being pushed by the pharmaceutical industry. This is the pharmaceutical. Merck said, we're going to make up for Vioxx with our MMR vaccine. They're pushing laws that force the government to buy for-profit vaccines that make them tens of millions of dollars, and to mandate their injecting them into people, into kids. And it's not just going to be kids; it's going to be adults too. Guarantee it's going to be adults. And there's a principle of informed consent for medical procedures, which is extremely important. And you just don't dismiss that principle because you get a couple of people saying, oh, we got to dismiss this principle. I mean, there's a principle of informed consent, which is very, very important. And it's being now legislated away. And I really urge people to, and this is the hardest thing to say on the left. It's the hard. I can say I'm a communist. I can say I'm a Marxist. I can say, even I can say taxes don't pay for government spending. Think again about vaccination. Oh, you're a moron.
Yeah, I get a lot.
You're a moron. It's the first word that comes out. You're a moron. And this is, I don't press it a lot, but I do put some things in there because I want people on the left to understand. You are now putting yourself on the side. You're going to lose these votes. I follow people on Twitter, fed up Democrat. I was a Democrat all my life. Now my child has been harmed, and they're telling me I'm an idiot. And they're telling me I got to help my other child, and they won't even let a doctor give me an exemption. So these are tens of thousands of people. You're not going to get people to vote for you if you're telling them your children have to take this vaccine, this drug, that there's nobody liable for it, that might harm you, that might harm your child. And you really, every one of these vaccines comes with an insert that lists the possible harmful effects. They all have them. Mm-hmm. And there's tens of them in every one of them, but they say, oh, there's no harmful effect. Plus the fact, the non-specific effects. You don't know what you're doing to your immune system by putting all these things into your immune system, the adjuvants and irritants in the immune system. And, I'll just leave you one thing. People don't know this, but, for example, this was not until a few years ago, it was okay to think about, to question this. And only in the last few years has people really, but you got to start thinking. The reason it's anathema now is because there's a push to pass these laws that force people to get vaccines. In 1976, Jonas Salk said that every case of polio in the past 10 years was caused by the polio vaccine. Well, people don't know that, Okay, and that was because it was the Salk vaccine, not his vaccine, because it was an attenuated virus vaccine. So what I'm saying is that was something that, in even the history of this, people don't know about the problematic history of this, which has been covered up. And please, if you think I'm a moron, then if that's all you got to say to me, you don't have anything to say to me.
Right.
Look at this as a scientific question as you'd look at anything else. And this is one of the things I think it really is. It's a big failure because it's hurting kids and it's creating anger and resentment in parents and families for the right reason.
Oh,
and it's politically going to hurt. Why didn't they vote for us?
Yeah.
You wanted their kid to get that 8th and 9th and 10th vaccine after they were already hurt by one. Mm-hmm. That's why they're not voting for it. You're stupid. The doctor said they were hurt by it. No, the doctor's wrong. He's a moron.
Right. Interesting.
Why don't they vote for us? Go online and look at the demonstrations in Trenton and in Sacramento about these vaccine laws with Robert Kennedy Jr. He's not he's a liberal, but he's not reactionary. But the fact is, Republicans are going to take advantage of this. Go look at the demonstrations in Italy about this because they're trying to push this throughout the world. Everybody's getting mandatory vaccines. They pass a law, and I think it's they're trying to pass a law in Jersey, a new law. You must a law mandating that whatever vaccine comes on the schedule from now to eternity must be administered.
Right.
This is like, could anybody in the world think it's scientifically reasonable to say, I'm going to write one prescription for every child in the world?
Yeah. Right. It's the power of the pharmaceutical industry.
Anyway, so yeah, I'm glad you did ask me about that because I do feel strongly about it, and it's hard to talk about because it's one of these issues that it's like 9/11 or something. You get into it, but and the reactions are because again, people have gotten to the point where they think they're being virtuous by opposing this. They're being virtuous by saying, I know everything about this. There's no question about it. If you say there are questions about it, I'm standing up for science and you're an anti-scientific moron. And I'm sorry, but it's not that way. It's the other way. That science is not something which says, oh, I know everything and you can't question it. That's not science. That's anti-scientific position. So.
Interesting. Well, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
I have to go. Thank you very much.
All right. Take it easy.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.